this isn't going to work out. I don't need to look at your reel. All I need to do is look at you. And you're just not cool enough. I'm German with a funny accent sitting here in front of you in Hollywood. If you had told my 16-year-old heavy metal drummer version from 1996 that that's what was going to happen, I would have said, yeah, you're batshit crazy. And I woke up the next morning with ringing in my ears. And that's when I was like, oh shit, I may have to rethink all of this. It was I think 4 or 5 minute film that 2 guys made in their basements with off-the-shelf hardware. And I was like, wow, that's insane. That's what I want to do. They did a lot with very little.
Being a VFX soup on things such as Black Panther, John Wick Chapter 4, and most recently Sinners. It's been one that I've been looking forward to be honest.
They're amazing. They're awesome. But they're not authentic. Ryan looks at me and he's like, bro, thank you so much. And he gave me a hug. And what I find really interesting is all of a sudden there's like a perceived authenticity that comes from or with shooting on film and, you know, projecting from film that I've never seen before.
Yes, VFX world. Welcome to episode 9 of the VFX Script Podcast with Motors VFX. We're back in LA for this one, and I'm delighted to have this guest with me today. Of being a VFX soup on things such as Black Panther, John Wick Chapter 4, and most recently Sinners. Mr. Michael Ralla, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Mate, buzzing. It's been one that I've been looking forward to be honest. And our conversations off air have been quite interesting, and I certainly am looking forward to diving into a few different bits. Before we get into that though, how did you get here?
How did I get here? You mean into this chair?
Right into this chair.
I drove my car from Manhattan Beach over the 405 to Hollywood. And that's the easy way how I landed. Not the Film Academy because they didn't want me at the time. But, again, more from like a scientific angle. Not so much about how do I create this, but like what's happening here and, how can we break this down? So 2003, we were like, let's shoot a cinematic film and on an HD camera. And, we had a really supportive professor. We drove to Amsterdam, IBC. I'm sure you're familiar with that. And I remember we went to, back then, Thompson Grass Valley. And we're like, hi, here's our pitch. Here's a little treatment. We want to make a 5-minute short film. Can we please have the Viper? And the Viper, nobody knows about this camera anymore these days. But it was like groundbreaking because it was basically a film. Well, no, not a film. One of the very first digital cameras that would allow you to capture a cinematic image. Still had a small chip, but, overall was filmed. Collateral was shot on that. Fincher was a really early adopter. And we were like, we want that camera. We want to shoot with that camera. And they're like, yeah, you're out of your mind. It did happen somehow. So we got it, shot a little film. And, we basically shot the whole film just because we wanted to do VFX. We were like, let's just shoot something around like the visual effects work that we want to do. And I remember, this was 2003. Yep. Like I remember seeing the Transformers cars from my childhood years. I was like, that would be cool. What if we have something that's transforming? It was about a guy who sits inside of a container and then the container's transforming around him. And then, eventually he gets out and he realizes, oh shit, everyone in this world is trapped in a container on top of like a high-rise building in a big city and watching TV, like that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But, really interesting. Those were the early years. And then, more or less at the same time, we had to do mandatory internships. So I did an internship at Scanline in Munich.
Okay.
I was one of the very first interns using After Effects because they were just like crewing up for a German feature, like a gay Star Wars parody, and they needed more people. They were very like tight and like a pretty closed off group at the time, and using in-house software. It's actually one of the oldest VFX companies around. They were founded in 1989, even though they just closed the Munich office. So like somehow I got in there, and it's a story in itself how I ended up at Scanline because, at the time when you were doing or interested in VFX in the early 2000s, most people wanted to become a flame artist or an inferno artist.
Yeah.
This guy here, me included. But I had a really interesting moment, and I keep telling this. It was there were a couple of those fancy, like advertisement or commercials places in Munich at the time. And, like there really are only a couple hubs in Germany where there's a real film industry, even though, like Germany does have a real local film industry making German films, actually a lot. And, so there's Munich and Berlin. And in both cities, you have a real full-on infrastructure, areas from Munich, and it has been there for like 100 years at this point. And similar to Berlin, like there were like labs developing film and all of that. In both cities, Berlin has Babelsberg, and then Munich has Bavaria Film. So I was based in Munich at the time because like that was just closer to the Black Forest, and it's also a really cool city. Like again, you have the south and the north in Germany, and the south has a slightly different mentality and all that. So I was like, I'm going to stick to Munich for the time being.
Sure.
Even though Berlin was just like that was the place where everyone wanted to be. It was like poor but sexy, and it was like the early years and Tempelhof and Kreuzberg and Anyway, so I ended up going to one of those commercials places and applied for an internship, and they called me like early. They were like, hey, we know we told you to come by next week, but can you come by now? And I was like on the street, looking like the typical heavy metal kid on a skateboard, wearing cut off camouflage pants and a Panther shirt. Showed up, or you should talk to one of our flame ops, if that's what you want to do. Walked inside of the suite, again, there was the $1 million machine. I was like, oh my God. And I wasn't even seated yet. And he's like, okay, so what do you want? I was like, I would like, I'm applying for an internship. I would love to, learn what it takes to be a flame artist. And I said, here's my reel. And then the guy pretty much right away said, like, this isn't going to work out. I was like, but you didn't even look at my reel. And he was like, I don't need to look at your reel. All I need to do is look at you.
Interesting.
And you're just not cool enough. I mean, look at yourself,
Wow.
And I was like, okay. That's disappointing. And that's, then Scanline, they were willing to take me. And then fast forward. So again, spent more time with that group in university. We did more projects together. Eventually, like we got to the final project. And, one thing to be said about the south of Germany, the universities and schools are very well equipped. There's a lot of money, there's automobile industry and all of that. And like the taxes fund the universities. And so they're really well equipped. But again, it's difficult to get into. So, we had a motion capture system. We had like a lot of cool equipment that just wanted to be played with. And again, we were always building these short stories around the stuff we wanted to do, around the technology we wanted to use, or the visual effects work that we had in mind that would, we thought would be cool or worth trying. And, so eventually we did the final film, and we asked Arri for like the D20, which was the predecessor of the Arri Alexa in 2007. Same story again. Hi, we would love to use your camera. And I remember like that seemed so out of range, but it somehow happened. And, I remember going to Arri and signing the rental sheet, and it said $1.5 million worth of equipment, and I remember calling our producer. I was like, do we have that insurance? Are we good for that? But I loaded it in the car. It was a cool experience. But, like one big thing that happened back then is, I was, again, with a bunch of my friends, in tandem to trying to finish university, we were also working at Scanline as freelancers. And back then, Shake was big, Apple Shake. They had just bought that software from a company called Nothing Real, just around the corner here in LA. And it was obvious that it was going to die very soon. So everyone was looking, everyone in VFX was looking for the next big or best compositing tool. And don't ask me how and why, but I had heard about Nuke from Digital Domain, Venice Beach, here, just around the corner. And more importantly, I had heard that Nuke was built as a flame killer. which is like, again, takes us full circle. Couple, to those, whatever it was 3 years ago, my whole experience was like, I'm going to learn how to use the flame killer. And I did, and I remember, like, I called D2 Software. That was the software arm of Digital Domain, because Nuke was an in-house tool. And it was only in use at Digital Domain at the time. No one else was using it worldwide because no one wanted to buy it from D2 because you'd be supporting a competitor.
Sure.
Even though it was insane, it was insanely ugly, but also insanely fast and really cool. And you could always see the potential back then in 2006 or 7, whenever that was. And, they gave us 10 licenses. And that's when I started learning Nuke, and that's how I learned the software. And we finished the film. They asked if they can use some of the footage as training material, which was part of the deal. It's still around today, which is wild. And then shortly after, Nuke was basically removed from the Digital Domain ecosystem because the Digital Domain was acquired by the same investment group as Foundry, the back then called the Foundry, the Foundry. So they were like, okay, I think this may be better as part of, like the Foundry, because that's a software company, and then we don't have that supporting the competition by buying their software aspect
Makes
anymore.
sense.
Okay, so I remember, like, I wasn't quite sure what to do after university. Finished that final film, and Scanline was doing an animated feature, which is something that I knew I definitely did not want to do. So I packed my bags and flew to Australia, Sydney, Bondi Beach specifically.
Okay.
And I was like, okay, let's see what happens, but I just got to try something different. And I knew, as I had heard, that Animal Logic was one, if not I think is one of the 2 first companies that purchased Nuke. So it's like, cool, I'm going to work for them. I'm going to, I don't want to use any of these other shitty tools anymore. And I remember I landed and it was amazing. I always wanted to learn how to surf, which I did. And I met a lot of good friends who are lifelong friends still. But I ran out of money fairly quickly, so I needed a job. I found a job on Facebook. There was a guy. It was a company called Babyfoot.
Okay.
And they were looking for compositors. I went there for an interview, and there was a guy called Michael Gracie interviewing me to basically work on his commercials. Same Michael Gracie who just did Better Man a couple of years ago and The Greatest Showman. And he was just, doing commercials with people working out of his living room. So I worked for Gracie a couple of months, and then, moved over to Animal Logic. And I thought I'd go back to Germany after half a year. And I ended up staying almost 5 years.
Wow. Nice.
Then after that, went to London, worked at Framestore, because they were just they were the first company in Soho switching to Nuke as well for Avatar. Specifically, because they had taken on some work from Weta, specifically stereoscopic live action shots that didn't fit their pipeline, because they were like, we want to focus on what we can really pipeline, which is the all CG stuff. It was really hard work, but it was really good. Small team, first time working in London without the back then the German VFX industry wasn't really recognized as a global player at all. So that was an interesting experience. Didn't want to stay in London. That was my cup of tea. I remember
fair enough. Nicely put.
Yes, exactly. Sitting in the 389 bus, going home from whatever it was, Soho to Angel, where I was living at the time, and and the rain's hitting the window. It's just I gotta get the F out of here. So I went back to Australia. Again, worked on I think another 2 features there, which was great. Kept surfing. And then I got a call from Digital Domain. This time it wasn't about, hey, do you want to use our software? This time it was, hey, do you want to work on Transformers, one of the Michael Bay movies?
Awesome.
I was like, yes, I definitely want to do that. And, it was, this goes back to the heavy metal roots, the Panther shirt and the camouflage pants, pirate flag flying on the building, the rebel attitude, fuck the rest, we're the best, and all of that. And I was like, yeah, I really want to, this is what I want to do. So I moved to LA. always thought I'd go back to Australia. And, work dried up, which is typical for LA. Like during the summer, usually films are shot, and then, like come like autumn or winter in post-production. So I went to Vancouver for a little bit, which was a great experience. Worked at MPC in 2011, and then I got a call from ILM to work on the first Avengers film. So worked at ILM, and then for several years was just going back and forth between ILM and Digital Domain. On a visa, on an H-1B visa to be precise. Like not everyone's a fraud like that actually. And then. Was doing that for quite some time, and then worked at Digital Domain on a Spike Jonze film called Her for a female supervisor who's now my wife.
Nice.
Yes. She was really good already back then. She's still the boss. Wearing the pants here.
Love it.
Not at home. Typically not. And, now we're married and, have a house and 2 kids and all that. Anyway, so, but, at some point in 2014, I was like, I need a little bit more than just like sitting behind a computer and working on other people's shots. And it wasn't that I wanted to direct or create my own films, but I was like, I want to be part of like the bigger movie making experience. I want to, I want to spend time with the actual creatives, not like just trying to figure out what the initial creative or creative intent of the shot was that I'm currently working on, in the dark at night, spending long hours trying to fix things that I didn't understand why they were shot the way they were shot. Yeah. So Framestore at the time they were opening an LA office specifically for commercials. And I joined them as one of the first 25 people, again, like at Scanline, and they were, guess what, switching from Flame to Nuke. So I was like, I want to be part of that. And it was
Back
great.
To the flame killing.
Yeah. I mean, look, whatever. At this point, I don't care anymore. But, you don't really forget these little things. So and then at first it was a real shock because I was going from working at ILM and, being offered to work on the next Star Wars to working on a Target commercial. Yeah. Which sucked. I was like, why am I doing this shit? I can't believe what I've done. But then, after a little while, I realized, this is less about the end product. This is more about how you get there, the way. Sure. And all of a sudden I was on set. And what's interesting about the LA industry is every single, feature director, every single feature DP, they're all shooting commercials in between projects.
Yes.
So you meet them all. You get to work with Leon Sandgren, Hoyte van Hoytema, Eric Messerschmidt. You name them. They're very likely they've worked with them at some point. And I'm still talking to a lot of them because the DP to me is always your best friend when it comes to creating good visual effects work. Mm-hmm. The director has the creative, and he's trying to tell a story, but ultimately, visually telling that story happens together with a DP. And I think you really want to be in lockstep with the DP because, eventually you're running with their vision, which is a big thing to me these days, which I call creative preservation of creative intent. Yeah. No one shows up on a movie set with bad intentions. Everyone wants to make a cool project, or a cool film, and then most people are also in this industry for the money. We're in it because we love what we do, right? If we were after the money, we'd be in finance, most of my neighbors in Manhattan Beach. I still keep scratching my head if I should actually do that. But anyway, so...
You could be a finance bro in the shorts, man. Literally, just rock up to Citibank in the shorts or JP.
Yeah, exactly, barefoot. Yes, I mean, but so, and I learned more and more about that, and you are able to get really good relationships with people, with directors, with DPs, and so I was doing that for almost 10 years, and then I got a call from Jeffrey Bauman, who I work with at Digital Domain, and he was like, hey, do you want to be my second unit and associate supervisor on Black Panther Wakanda Forever? Amazing. That was 2001. I had done a little bit of, 4 weeks of on-set supervision work on Macbeth with Joel Cohen. before that, which was basically filling in for like 2 guys from Germany running a company in New York, and it was in the height of COVID, that initial wave, and they weren't allowed back to go back to LA on set. So they asked me, hey, we were told to hire somebody local. Do you want to fill in for us? Of course, I wanted to fill in. It was great, awesome experience, masterclass in filmmaking. So back to Wakanda Forever. Moved to Atlanta, shot the film. At some point, Jeffrey ended up directing a whole unit himself. There was a lot of underwater stuff, and he was like, well, here you go. You run with main unit now. You can do principal photography with Ryan and Autumn, his DP. And, that was kind of the beginning of that relationship with Ryan and also with Autumn, because I remember, again, trying to figure her out and how she was shooting and all of that. And she had just done Loki, and she was pretty harsh on VFX. And she was like, whatever you guys do, once it goes through your VFX pipeline, it looks like shit, and it doesn't look like anything that I ever shot. It doesn't look like my lenses, it doesn't look like my lighting, it just stands out. And I was like, okay, hold on. Here comes the German mindset again. Let's break this down. So what's the issue here? And then I was like, she was just like an emotional bundle. It was just coming out of her. This and that, and the lighting here, blah, blah, blah. Hang on, stop. Show me exactly, why does it not look like your lenses anymore? She's like, they do this and that and that and that, and anamorphic here and there. And I was like, oh, anamorphic lenses. And, so I went back and actually studied what anamorphic lenses do and how they work. And she is a big Panavision fan. So, she's got Dan Sasaki tuning, detuning her lenses, not tuning. So creating, intentional imperfections to give them quote unquote character. And, I realized I don't really understand anything what's happening optically in that lens. So, let's break this down. And so, there was a big blue book coming out back then. I think it was called the Cinematography Lens Bible or something like that. I ordered like one of the first, it was just getting released, and so I ordered one of the very first prints, and I was like, okay, so here, there's something called sidal aberrations, and there's a lot, like, so we're talking about geometric distortion and spherical aberration, chromatic aberration, and shading and coma and astigmatism, and there's quite a lot more. But all of a sudden, I was able to like break down what she liked about her lenses and actually put a finger on it and use the right terminology. And that's one thing that we did on Wakanda Forever. We established a digital lens profiling workflow where we actually shot specific grids, maps, and charts to quantify all of those specific aberrations for each lens. It was terabytes of data. And then, created a tool set together with Weta Digital to recreate all those aberrations digitally, apply them to our perfect digital renders, so that they inherit those optical imperfections that give everything the character that the DP likes. And but we realized, okay, now we understand, but we need to get everyone working on the film to understand the same stuff. So we trained artists on the quote-unquote vendor side, and we'll get to the vendor in a moment, to understand the visual language. But the specific component of the visual language that I'm referring to is like what the lenses do.
Yep.
And here's what those aberrations are called, and here's what we need to do, and to in order to recreate them so that the DP is happy. But happiness of the DP is just like a byproduct along the way. Ultimately, what we want, and everyone wants this, is just seamless VFX work. And this is one way to actually make it seamless. Making sure that everything looks as if it was shot through the same piece of glass. Now, but you also got to factor in what's happening in front of the camera, and lighting is very, very important, and that's one thing. I realized I didn't really understand lighting. I remember taking all the classes in school and learning about 3-point, key light, rim light, fill light, and all this. but those are basic concepts, like, and what she was doing was very different. Like there was lots of negative fill and, like lots of contrast. So we actually had to really dissect her lighting with diagrams and, example shots and all of that, and then teach people how to light so that the full CG shots would actually look as if she shot them. And, to a point, we brought her into post to give us feedback on how we need to light certain things, which normally never happens, or very rarely, because, we do what we do because we can, we have the lights in CG. Why do we need somebody, to tell us where to put them? Same for the camera and all of that. We think we can do it all. And sometimes it's actually good to ask for help, which is what we did. And, that's when I realized, it's really important to, for creating seamless visual effects work isn't just about like matching everything into a T. You also have to make sure that the creative intent is maintained. Like that, like even the last piece or the small little wheel at the very end of the pipeline needs to understand what the storytelling in the shot is, and it needs to understand the creative intent of the lighting and all of that. And if that's the case, then all of a sudden you end up with seamless work because, like everyone was basically pulling on the same rope.
Love that.
Long story. I'm sorry.
That is
total
awesome.
monologue.
No, Michael, that's really cool. It's like even just enjoying listening to the passion. I can feel the passion. And but that's kind of what visual effects and filmmaking is all about, right? As you said, if everyone was doing it for the dollar sign, there's definitely other industries that probably a little bit less stressful.
Sure.
that you could go into. Also, fantastic. We're gonna jump onto talking a little bit about Sinners.
Let's talk about Sinners.
However,
yeah.
Before we do that, again off air, mention some really interesting things, and one I really loved because I mentioned VFX vendors.
Oh yeah, big one.
Break that down.
Okay, it's another that could be it could turn into like a slightly longer monologue again, but I'll try.
No worries.
Okay, so look, I worked on the vendor side for a long, long time. What that means is you work, in a VFX house that is hired to do like all the VFX work or a sequence or several sequences on a film.
Yep.
And, usually there's a studio side supervisor, at least on the bigger projects, who tells you what to do and all that. I never liked that word because I felt like I was basically I wasn't really part of the filmmaking process, and I felt like that was devaluing our contribution. Like we actually have a lot of power over the image. In VFX, you can do anything. But you can also perfectly ruin what people have done before you, or you can really like take it to the next level and absolutely boost it, augment it, make it more exciting, help the storytelling. But I was never in a position of power to actually like change that in any kind of way. Yeah. So, here I am doing Wakanda Forever as the associate second unit supervisor. And then I was doing a Mel Gibson project as virtual production supervisor, but working with Mel. And then it was, only for the shoot, not for post. And then I was doing a project just helping my wife on John Wick. She was the main supervisor on that. And then fast forward, Sinners.
Yes.
This is for me, it was the first time as like first chair solo. This time you can make happen whatever you need to make happen, and it's under your control. So I remember getting the call from Ryan. Hey, bro, I'm shooting a film. It's a vampire film with Michael B. Jordan, and he's in it twice. Okay, cool. Sounds great. I'm in. And I hung up, and right away I called James Alexander, good friend of mine, my VFX producer, said, hey, so Ryan just called. I think we should do this movie together. And then I told him, look, Ryan's not the kind of guy who makes a film with a bunch of people. He makes films with his friends. And, everyone who gets invited into that trusted ring of collaborators, that's a real honor. So like, I need to extend that to you, and let's bring you in, because the VFX producer / VFX supervisor relationship is a really important one. Also one that's pretty volatile at times, breaks very often, because what usually happens is on the studio side, director and VFX executives like page several VFX supervisors to the director. They interview them all and choose one. And then the studio often chooses the VFX producer. And then you're like, here you go. Like, here, make friends. Good luck.
Yeah, interesting.
That can work. And it can work beautifully. Or it also can't work at all. And that happens more than you would think. That one of the two gets swapped out, like halfway into the show or after the shoot, or, and it always sucks for whoever it is, because, it breaks this continuation of creative intent. Like you go from pre into a shoot, into post, and you accumulate a lot of knowledge, a lot of relationships, and what's up. So the moment that gets delineated or torn apart, all of a sudden, you're no longer, it's really hard to actually serve the movie to make it better. And what happens pretty often is that the VFX supervisor is like trying to partner with the director, and then like the VFX producer, it can happen that their loyalty is more to the studio or like a specific person who hired them, so that they get rehired, instead of like supporting the VFX supervisor or like actually working for what's best for the film. I don't want to say that's exclusively the case for the VFX producer. It can also happen for the VFX supervisor. So if you have a team who knows each other, who work well, and who have each other's back, I think that's always to the advantage of everyone, and especially the movie. So called him, and we looked at all the options that we have to do the obvious tuning work, but there was also going to be a lot more. And we read the script, and remember like being told it's 220 shots or 250 shots, and we want to bring the volume down to 160. And I read the script, and I was like, this is Ryan Coogler, and this is the guy who I worked with at Marvel, and at the time he had like at least 16 VFX shots per page, and this script is like 120 pages. So I don't know. I think that's never going to happen. And they were like, no, we have to. And I was just like, I don't know, man. This reads like at least 750 shots, if not more. So we started talking about who would do that work. And, it was obvious stuff and then less obvious stuff. There was the cotton. And there was this real world building component in that film that is emotionally and historically extremely important to Ryan.
Totally.
Which is, the perfectly flat horizon, and where you see miles into the distance, and it is aligned with a sea of white cotton plants. And, cotton, like his grandparents are from the South, and they were slaves. They were picking cotton in the fields. And I remember, we were shooting south of Atlanta in 2022, and he stopped because there was a cotton field on the side of the road, and he wanted to film it. And it had like an insane emotional impact on him just seeing that. And he saw that for the first time. And he, when we fast forward to Sinners, he showed me those videos. I was like, This is the first time that I saw cotton, like this is what this needs to look like. And, and he wanted that open horizon because it gives you like a sense of there's no escape. No matter how far you run, you can't hide, which was really important for the storytelling on Sinners. So essentially every shot where we're outside has CG cotton on the film. You would never realize that, and you shouldn't think about it, but it was extremely important to the world building, and like we're like, it's just a set extension, but it was very, very important to Ryan. And, so we knew we were going to have to build procedural systems because, he wanted sharecroppers to be nestled in, and then certain rows had to be picked and at specific times of the day, because you would start in the low cotton when the sun was low and then move into high cotton. There's a whole historic component that goes with it. And I learned a lot about African American history and Black culture on this film that I had never been taught before. There's I was just talking to Ryan about that the other day because he was doing a screening in Berlin, and turns out that some of the, and now I'm seriously digressing, but like some of the race theories of the Third Reich were in fact based on like Jim Crow laws from the United States. They were modeled directly after that. And then, in 1933, the Nazis thought they were a little too strict, which is, insane. But anyway, so going back to the point. So we had to find companies that could do the work, quote unquote vendors.
Yep.
And, but we knew the work would grow. So what James and I said is like, look, what we need is people who are willing to like partner with us. We need creative partners who are stakeholders within this film, because everything will grow. No pun intended. Not just the cotton, but like the shotgun and everything. And, there was this surreal montage, like a couple of script pages that you would read, and the words were just jumping off the page. As Sammy turns around, that he sees like an ancestor from the present, the past, and the future. And it's like, holy shit.
Yeah.
So, it wasn't, there was a lot of room for creative interpretation, which is cool. But you want people who are actually interested in that. So, and I said that to James, look, we have very little work where you just send out a shot package and it's objectively clear what needs to happen. Like most of what we have is, we'll have to figure something out. We'll have to like see what all of this needs to look like. There's, and Ryan really shapes a film with his editor, Michael Ralla, in post. So we knew there was going to be back and forth. And that's when we said we need people who are willing to become stakeholders, and we're going to let them all in. They're going to get a lot of creative input, a lot of creative control.
Yeah.
We'll let them talk directly to Ryan and all of that. Again, unfiltered, communication of creative intent, end to end. And that turned them into VFX partners. And, I remember at first it was unusual for people, Nick Marshall, our LM supervisor, he was like, hey, so I don't know, he kept calling me the client. I was like, Nick, stop calling me the client. Like you're part of this now. Welcome to the club, and welcome to the Go the Extra Mile club.
Yes.
But and the way I explained it to them was like, look, you're not a vendor. You're not like somebody who sells greasy hot dog fried in stale oil on the corner of the street at midnight.
Yes.
That's a vendor. You're a street vendor. Yeah. Like what you are is we want your input. We want your creativity. And, we really want you to take ownership of the work that we're doing. And, we found fantastic partners, Storm Studios in Norway, ILM in Vancouver, fantastic team. And then, unbelievable team around Guido Walter in Australia. And, incredible previous team at Barra Boom here in Los Angeles, and that included our own VFX team, on the studio side, like the coordinators, production managers, and all of that, and everyone we hired essentially, and that's. I think everyone eventually was hugely appreciative because they felt they were part of something bigger, and that's how you get an end result that actually has heart and soul, and that isn't just like you get something that is bigger than just the sum of all of its parts.
Love it. Learned something there. Creative partners is the way forward, and look, it makes total sense, and it's nice that on that post side, feeling that genuine appreciation, because sometimes that's not always the case.
No, I remember that. You just you get notes back. Your shot sucks. Thanks. Make it better.
Yeah.
And okay, what does that even mean? And because somebody just poured their heart into it. Again, totally. Nobody comes with bad intentions. Like nobody purposefully does shit work. It usually stems from something, that wasn't shot right, or that now a shot has to do something else that it was designed for, or was just poorly planned. Or somebody doesn't understand what the original creative intent was. So it's always a communication thing, and it goes back to the supervisor. So the more transparency you can have, the better. And that's one thing that I was doing with all the guys, for all 8 creative partners, not vendors. Like I had them all on iMessages on my phone, and we just constantly go back and forth. They're like, hey, how about this? And like I told them, you can hit me up anytime, not at night, because I'm bringing my kids to sleep, but I will get back to you. And again, I think it gives you a better end result, but it also gives people a sense of like creative fulfillment. The people aren't disenfranchised. It's not like a faceless pipeline where you're just a little cog in the machine.
100%. I love it. Makes total sense. And I'll ask some more kind of like specific questions.
Yes, please.
For people that may be a little bit more junior in the industry, or some people that listen to this that aren't in the industry. How big is the task for you? With your position as that sort of the VFX soup on a film like this. What does that entail really?
It's a great question because if you watch the film and at first glance it seems as if there's really not all that much VFX work. Because hopefully there's very little that stands out, very little that you can identify as, this was impossible to do for real. They must have used digital effects for that.
Yeah.
Like there's Michael B. Jordan twice in the film. So obviously that must have happened somehow. But the funny thing is, I've read that a lot online, and it was also some of the feedback we got back from the test screenings is that people didn't realize it was the same guy. And I've read that online a lot where they're like, it took me 20 and 30 minutes into the film to understand that it's the same guy playing both twins. And I was like, yes, that's exactly what we were looking at. That's what we wanted. And a lot of that I can only credit that to Michael B. Jordan and, his character development, the mannerisms and all of that. And a lot of it, especially like the body language, we only really understood as we were in post. We were like, okay, he does this when he's smoke, and that when he's a stack, and and there are the differences. Like I remember when we were shooting the film, it wasn't as evident. So like full body shots were always a really, really big ask because again the character development was so distinctively different. But like generally. And Ryan asked me at the very beginning, like, what is your philosophy or your principle for the VFX work? And I told him back then, I was like, look, the way I understand this film, like all the work that we're doing needs to be timeless. And timeless in a way as in, think about movies like Fight Club, think about movies like Children of Men, the films of the early 2000s, late 90s. You can still watch them today and almost all of the visual effects work holds up.
Yeah.
Because, like people took their time, the shots were well thought through and well planned and all of that. Like nothing stands out. Or like, for instance, more recent example, First Man, perfect example. Space exploration, landing on the moon and all of that. It has to be visual effects, but you don't think about it as VFX and you don't see it and you can still watch it years later, decades later, and it still looks good. For a lot of, and I'm guilty of that myself, a lot of the superhero films, that's not the case. You watch them now and you're like, holy shit, man, what we were thinking, this looks like a video game. So those films do not have a lot of half-life, like they just don't age well. So that's one thing. I was like, look, Ryan, what I really want for this film is that you look at it in 25 years and like everything that, Ralla and his team were doing still looks good. Where you're like, this is, you can still watch it without like, just starting to feel like, ooh, man, I don't want to watch this, So I've heard that specific comments from one of the Harry Potter producers, when they're now watching the early movies, they're like, ooh, God, this is kind of cringy. But, so we were like, that's the one thing that's probably the most important leitmotif for us. Create work that just supports the story as much as possible, that doesn't stand out, subtlety instead of spectacle, just invisible, seamless overall, like as if we weren't there. So, like, it's funny, now we're in the awards cycle and I hear people, like, I don't know about this film. There's not really all that much VFX in there. And it's like, dude, it's more than 1,000 shots.
Yeah.
It's half of the runtime of the film that went through the VFX pipeline. So I'm like, it's a little disappointing to hear that, but at the same time, it's the biggest compliment you could give me because that's exactly what our motivation was, and like in order to achieve that seamlessness, it's not just like matching looks and lighting and all of that, but it's this creative intent continuation where we're not just designing a digital train station set extension that is massive. We're actually designing it under guidance of the production designer because she built the rest of the film, and she knows exactly what the references are that we should use and all of that. So why would we do it ourselves and think we can do it better if she's done everything else? And so we roped her in and asked. Before we showed anything to Ryan, we had Hannah Beekler look at our set extensions and.
Awesome.
Same for wardrobe, Ruth Cora. And from both, I learned a lot. Again, Black history, African-American culture, Pullman porters. I had never heard of them before. A lot of the Jim Crow stuff was completely unknown to me because that's just not what I grew up, being taught. Because we had our full set of, very heavy history that we learn all about. So, but that's one way to make it seamless, not just like matching what was shot and what we see in camera, but also like what's outside of the frame. What does the world look like and all that?
Wow. We could go on all day.
Oh yeah, actually. I mean, I can talk.
We might have to keep Max. We might have to keep rolling. but I think like talking about like the shooting and stuff, like the whole film was shot on film, right?
Yes.
I mean, like, what were the challenges from the visual effects standpoint in that sense?
Oh man, so it's not just some kind of film. It's 65 millimeter film. Kodak 5219 stock, which is a tungsten stock, so designed for like artificial light and with like 3200 Kelvin white balance. For any of the DPs out there, if that was incorrect, then I apologize. But that's
no. Come after him in the comments.
Yeah, exactly. No, I look, essentially, a white.
Yeah.
Will appear as white on the film if, in fact, the color, the white is slightly yellowish, but once you go outside, everything turns blue, and it's become like fashionable to shoot that film without a filter outside because you can stretch that material or that footage so much that you can, just correct the blue out in the eye, which we'll get to. Anyway, and start from the beginning.
Yeah, for sure.
When I heard about that, I was like, oh God, why are we doing this? Why are we shooting on film? And this is where the German engineer brain kicks in again, and like an early adopter, me being an early adopter of digital cameras and actually being really, really like a fan of them and an early proponent. And I was really excited and always felt it was amazing that the technology was getting pushed further and further to a point where if you ask me, I would say, we're at a level with digital cameras now where they're undoubtedly better than film. Higher, much higher sensitivity. They're basically like night vision goggles at this point. Yep. You can't ever do that with film anymore. You need a lot more light. Much bigger dynamic range. I mean, the Alexa 35 captures 17 stops. The way film is digitized these days, we're still using a traditional Cineon log curve, which has, I think, 12.5 stops maximum. You cannot, even if you up the bit range, the transfer curve still limits the available stops. So, there's barely 13 stops. And that's a lot. That's a big difference. And then spatial resolution, there's just so much happening on the film emulsion and all of that even if you use a large 15-perf IMAX film frame, I hear all these stories about, it technically has 18K, but no one can scan it at 18K. Currently it's traditionally scanned at 8K resolution, like 8,192 pixels, sometimes a little bit more than that. And, and I looked at all those scans from our film and I was like, look, I mean, what I see here, I can't really see all that much of a difference between 8 and 4K. Does it matter? It didn't matter at all, because that's not what it was about. And I'll get to that in a moment. Anyway, so long story short, from a technical perspective, I was like, why are we doing this? From a workflow perspective, it was even crazier because, why would we deal with physical media that is also like really volatile until it's developed? We're shooting in Louisiana. There were like 2 flights every day going to LA because the only lab in the United States that's left is in Burbank, Photocam.
No way.
And they were developing the film, and then not scanning it, pushing it through a telecine machine for the dailies, which creates a really weird workflow, and it feels like you're working with essentially. It's a blast from the past, and it feels like you're working in the early 2000s because the pipeline that hasn't been developed since then, because no one else but Christopher Nolan was using that format. So here we are shooting not one, but 2 different 65mm formats. So it's Ultra Panavision, which is like 5 perf 65mm film, which is going through the camera vertically, top to bottom. So what that means is it's a negative that is 3 times larger than Super 35 with 5 perforation holes on each side. And that was going through Panavision cameras, the same ones that were used for Hateful Eight, with the same anamorphic lenses that were used for Hateful Eight, which have a 1:3:3 aspect ratio. We captured, I would say, 60 to 75% of the film with that format. The other format, and that's like the absolute king thing, is IMAX 15 perf, which is 3 times larger than what I was just talking about. So 9 times larger than 35mm. Now the film is going through the camera horizontally, and you have an insanely large negative with 15 perforation holes. We were mixing those 2 forms. And I remember being invited to an early test screening at IMAX headquarters in Playa Vista, comparing the 2. And, at the moment you jump to IMAX, all of a sudden the frame explodes and you get this massive verticality that I had never seen before. At least that kind of juxtaposition. And it was insane. And, I was still scratching my head about all the pipeline and how we were going to make it work. And, the big thing to me was that this being a Ryan Coogler film, and Ryan, having grown up in the Marvel world, he's used to like a high visual effects shot count because that's how he works. And we talked about this earlier, even the script just read like 750 shots. Like the total shot count eventually ended up just over 1,000, being over 1,000 shots. Half the film's runtime again. And now you have this ancient pipeline, but it takes about 30 seconds to scan an IMAX frame, 1 frame. And the surreal montage is 3.5 minutes, which is like tons of visual effects. So it takes like, sometimes for turnaround, for turnovers to the VFX partners, we were like, we can't turn this over because it's still going to be scanning for another couple days.
Wow.
Whereas like with the digital camera, here's the file.
Done.
Yeah, done. Exactly. And we'll transfer it. Whereas here, all of a sudden, you have 2 different companies scanning the film because it's scanned in parallel at Photocam and IMAX headquarters in Playa Vista, which is, like the same distance that I just traveled to come here to you in Hollywood, like to Manhattan Beach. Your physical media needs to be like brought back and forth, and it takes a while to scan it. It takes a long time. IMAX were developing a new scanner that's faster, but you're dealing with all this stuff, and then it goes into DPX files, another agent file format, and it was really hard for us in the visual effects department to make that work. And even the post-production supervisor, Tina Anderson, who has done all of the Nolan films, said she's never had a project that was as tight as this, just because so much. I mean, first of all, we had a DI, digital intermediate, so everything needed to be scanned, but everything needed to be scanned early because it had to go through the visual effects pipeline. And, that was new for her as well. And, routinely, like Photocam and IMAX were scanning day and night continuously just so that we could get through everything that we needed to actually get the shots done. We had to delay turnovers because we didn't have the DPX sequences for certain shots. And again, I was like, why are we doing this? What is going on? And it's really hard for me, again, German engineer, scientific, like scientific perspective, or pseudo-scientific perspective on all of this. And I was like, I don't know, like, what is it? Why are we doing this? And then you have cameras like breaking down as the sun's setting, and then there's Scotty, the one guy who knows how to service them, showing up with like a bunch of hex keys, like, oh, okay, here you go, now it works. But like half the film got shredded. I was constantly just scratching my head. From my perspective, it would be so much easier, so much better to shoot digital, until I saw the first cuts and people's reactions. And all of a sudden I was like, holy shit, there's something going on that at least I can't quantify. It's something outside of the frame, like especially when you see the film being projected as a film print, like people were like emotionally reacting to that, something that I had never seen or felt before, and I started scratching my head. I was like, I don't really know what's going on here. I don't really understand, and it doesn't want to get into my engineering brain because I don't know how to describe it. And like we did several screenings for like some of friends and families and parents of our kids. Friends, just to say thank you, because I was gone so much. And they have nothing to do with our industry. They don't understand any of the technology or the technicalities. But several of them came to me after a screening in Playa Vista, after watching the film an IMAX 70mm film print, were like, this was amazing. This was something that I haven't seen in a long time. The grain and the flickering and everything that's happening. Like, it felt like I was watching a movie in my teenage years, and it transported them back into like where you were, just turning on Netflix and watching, something. Not that Netflix is bad. I mean, watch it all the time. But it's just different. It becomes more of an experience. And the first time we ever watched the film like that with Ryan, light turns on, everyone's quiet. He's like, holy shit. This felt like somebody else made this film a long time ago, which is what he was intending to do, because he felt digital was not appropriate for that period of time. But it's to me, film is absolutely timeless. It's been 100 years old, and now there's a resurgence. And what I find really interesting is all of a sudden there's like a perceived authenticity that comes from or with shooting on film and projecting from film that I've never seen before. But I think, with this wave of AI slob where everyone can just generate like insane visuals, and, it blows my mind too, the same goes for audio. Like I'm listening to like jazz renditions of Enter Sandman, and they're amazing. They're awesome, but they're not authentic. Yeah. Whereas like a film projection, for whatever reason, people really perceive it as authentic. And I think that's the explanation why Nolan is selling out entire venues a year in advance before the film comes out. It was impossible to get tickets for screenings at the Universal City Walk that were 15 perf IMAX film projections. They were sold out for weeks. And, we're now doing screenings for the award cycle, and the one screening that we're doing in Playa Vista in a couple of weeks on 70mm 15 perf IMAX projection. It's already booked out,
Amazing.
So there's, I think, and that really gives me hope, because, people, I think there's a real desire to see that. And funnily enough, that's when I was starting, okay, like, let's see if we can find something in there that you can somehow like scientifically interpret as like a reason why people are drawn to that. And, there's one aspect that I find really fascinating. So when you're watching a 2-hour film as a film projection in a theater, you're watching a full hour of black. You're sitting in a dark room with an empty screen because, that the shutter in the projector is actually blocking the lamp while the film is being transported to the next frame. And that's not just happening once, it's happening twice per second for 1/48th of a second. So, like, the film flickers, and if you look at the screen, like with your peripheral vision, you can perceive the flicker, but at the same time, what it essentially means is that, the screen's empty. So what, and this is, I don't know if this is true, but I find a very interesting theory. I think you get higher engagement levels because your prefrontal cortex, which is deeply, very closely connected to your like eyes and your whole visual system, essentially has to interpolate across those gaps.
Interesting.
So you see an image and then you see black, and essentially your brain has to interpolate and fill in the blanks.
Wow.
The entire time, which I think why you get more awareness or a higher awareness level as you're watching a film projection, because it's not just like a perfectly still image. Like there's so many imperfections. There's so much stuff that's happening, scratches and gate weave and all of that. And it's different every single time the film's being played back, even though they're trying to make it as perfect as possible. That's where I think one part of that authenticity comes from, and like that's what I keep telling people. The beauty of film is basically all the cumulative aspects of its imperfections.
Mm-hmm.
It's not, film isn't great for what it's good at, because, I mean, again, from a scientific engineering perspective, it's really not all that great anymore, or has been superseded by film, but it doesn't fucking matter. Like that's not what it is about. And so where the beauty really comes from is like, the sum of all that stuff that it isn't great at. And that's, I mean, it's a unique thing.
Yeah, I mean, like I said this before, but I think what I just love the passion in this, and I was going to ask you to talk about film finishing next, actually. But there's so many things that you've mentioned there, and we spoke about this off air as well. And what gives me hope for this industry moving forward is there's so many things that you've mentioned that just kind of come back to the power of storytelling. And actually, that's what the key thing is here.
Yeah.
You know? So the fact that you're talking with this much energy about things that are actually so relevant and important to the telling of the story, not outside noise almost, is massive.
Yeah, I mean, you can easily just describe all of that as like nerd stuff. I mean, this is for like film aficionados or connoisseurs, and and for the geeks and all that. But man, the Manhattan Beach parents tell me it's not, because they did see it and they cared, and it was a unique experience. And they asked me, when are we going to do it again? What's the next film you're working on? And can we watch it in the same theater as a film print again? I was like, I don't know, man. Like it's really difficult to shoot that format. It costs a lot of money, but like there's also very limited infrastructure. So if there's now a resurgence of interest in all of that, like I was talking to Tina Anderson, the post-production supervisor, about that. She was like, it's currently not possible, because there's only a certain amount of those cameras worldwide available, and they're going from one production to the next. And then it's not only the cameras, it's also the infrastructure, like the lab and the scanners and the people who know how to deal with all of this.
Yeah.
It's really finite and really limited. And, like it's funny. I've heard that a lot recently, where people call me, like visual effects supervisor colleagues, they want to talk about the twinning that we did and how we did that and all of that. Because it apparently, and this is great to hear, set a new reference bar, which is great. I'm really proud of that. But the other thing that people want to talk about, in particular on the studio side, all of a sudden is, can you advise other productions on how to shoot on film, and what would you recommend? And specifically large format film like 65, VistaVision.
Yeah.
And it's not, because so I think it's no longer going to be Nolan and Villeneuve and Peele and, recently we were looking for a moderator for some of those screenings, and we specifically were looking for people, VFX people with 65 millimeter film experience, and, that understand how hard it is to work on that format, because the magnification levels is so high, even though you're working with, normal 8K, 6K, 4K resolutions. It's a 4K master, but like just it's being projected on such big screens, in such a tall image and all of that. And, the pipeline is so much to deal with. And I mean, it's a lost art to how to like seamlessly integrate and composite those shots because people haven't touched scanned film, let alone 65 millimeter film over the last 15 years. Like, it's a really exclusive club of filmmakers. There's five VFX soups worldwide who we found that have dealt with significant numbers of 65 millimeter IMAX VFX shots. I'm not talking about let's do, I don't know, 20 or 50 shots. I'm talking about a substantial amount of the film, which you had in Nope, you had in the Nolan films, some of them, not all of them, and then you had in First Man, and there's a couple more. And same goes for the directors and DPs. It's an elite club because it's just currently the infrastructure doesn't sustain a wider user base. And
can it become wider?
Oh, I'm sure it can, but I don't know what it takes. So, for instance, the one guy who we actually who we learned a lot from was David Keeley at IMAX. He was basically the godfather of IMAX film production. He was on every Nolan film. Since was the last film he worked on. He died, I think, a couple of months ago. Okay. But his legacy lives on, and he was whoever showed large format would be in contact with David Keeley at some point. The theater's named after him at IMAX, and I don't know. I hope they're gonna expand on his legacy. I hope there will actually be infrastructure put back. There's the guy who was always crazy about digital cameras and who's with a digital background, a VFX supervisor. I had no beef. I wasn't even interested in exploring the medium at all. But it was a great experience to go through that, even though it was fucking hard.
I mean, I love that, and the fact that you was up for that pivot as well, and seeing what's on the other side is absolutely awesome. Michael, I could talk to you for hours. I really could. But I want you to wrap this episode up with a question that I ask everybody. And I specifically haven't mentioned this to you. But,
okay.
Can you give me one peak of your VFX career so far? Your film VFX career so far?
One peak.
One peak.
Oh, I mean, it's hard to just pin down one specific peak because we're lucky again to do what we like to do for a living. I mean, look, I'm German with a funny accent sitting here in front of you in Hollywood.
Yeah.
If you had told my 16-year-old heavy metal drummer version from 1996 that's what was going to happen, I would have said, yeah, you're batshit crazy, sure. So the fact that all of this got me across the world, making friends in lots of different countries. And then, now I've been living in the United States for 15 years is unbelievable. This is just crazy. But, really, really cool. And then within that time, there are moments when you're in a location where you can't believe that somebody pays you to be here. I was shooting, I'm really good friends with this Swiss-German director, Mark Forster, who I love. And we were shooting a commercial in the Bahamas on a boat with dolphins jumping around us. I was just really? For real? And then there are other moments, when I was flying with Fred North, one of the best helicopter pilots in the world. And, this really cool RLDP, Dylan Goss, over the Sierra in California, miles and miles of just snow-covered mountains around us, shooting high-resolution plates. And it's just this is insane that somebody's paying money for this. For me to do this.
Yeah.
But, then there's also the little personal moments. I remember last day of the Sinus shoot, we were shooting a roof burn element. Because it was the last day and we were going to burn down the house. It was the juke joint set on a stage with the cameras, And I remember talking about this, and people were like, "You're crazy. What are you even talking about?" I was talking to the special effects supervisor Donnie D, and I was like, "Hey, this is what we want to. This is what I think we should do. Do you think we can make that happen?" And they were like, "Yeah, I think we can make that happen." It's awesome. Don't tell anyone. So then, then one of the DP hears about this. She calls me at night. I was like, "Are you out of your mind? What are we doing here?" And she's like, "Tell me that this is a locked off element." And I said, "Yeah, sure. Can be whatever you want it to be." So we burned down the house, and it was the absolute climax of the entirety of principal photography. The one thing that everyone was looking forward, even Michael B. Jordan came for it. And we looked up, we shot that element, and it was insane. And then Ryan and I were both wearing gas masks, and we were right in there to see like what's happening with tons of witness cameras running, and IMAX camera rolling, slow motion and real time and everything. We reviewed on the monitor. Ryan looks at me, and I'm like, "Are you happy with this? Is this what you had in mind?" And he's like, "Bro, thank you so much." And he gave me a hug, and that was the end of principal photography. And that was a moment that stuck with me, and I think that's really, really cool. So yeah, I'll always remember that.
What a way to finish.
Well, one thing that I should mention is I met my wife through all of this. That probably has to take the cake to your question.
That's the way to finish.
Good.
Michael, thank you so much for your time, man. Really appreciate it.
Man, I appreciate it for you. I appreciate you. Thanks for having me.
Awesome.
Really cool.